The Girl in the Glass Sphere. A museum on Mars displays a mysterious alien woman frozen in time. They called her the Girl in the Glass Sphere, as if a name could soften the way she made a room go quiet. Every morning the museum lights along. Gallery 7 warmed from deep amber to day white, and the sphere caught the glow like a slow sunrise. She floated inside it, knees drawn in, hands lightly folded, hair drifting as if water remembered her. The plaque at the base listed measurements and guesses and a story about the dig team who found her under the basalt shelf near Elysium Planitia. As if facts could explain wonder. The last line on the plaque read, "Unknown stasis, unknown species, unknown cause. I was hired to dust her." Conservator sounded grand, but most days on Mars it meant learning the patience of red, grit, and glass. The Ariadne Museum of First Contact, though no contact had ever officially occurred, sat under a clear-span dome on the ridge above Tharsis City. The dome made the sky feel close. Dust storms unrolled like red curtains beyond it, and when their static brushed the structure, the hair on my arms lifted, as if the whole building had taken a breath. Before the museum opened each day, I would walk the galleries in soft shoes. I checked seals and desiccant packs, the hairline cracks that formed if the air recyclers dozed too long. The little things that become big things in a place that remembers it was once dead. In Gallery 7, I would slow down. The world asked for quiet there, and I was happy to give it. The sphere was the color of meltwater and the size of a small room. If you looked straight through, it was perfectly clear. If you looked from the edge, the glass thickened into rainbows, and you could see a shimmer that made your eyes want to close. Inside, the girl's skin held the faintest luminescence, not a glow so much as a refusal to be entirely dark. The shape of her face was strange in ways that became beautiful the longer you stayed. Fine gold constellations dotted her cheeks and collarbones, a star chart carried under the skin. She looked asleep. The first time I stood beside her, the thought came uninvited and complete. She is not a specimen. She is a person. The plaque gave her a number. It felt like an insult spoken softly. On the third week, when the dust on my rag reflected the lights in tiny galaxies and my feet had found the rhythm of the empty museum, I heard the hum for the first time. It was not sound exactly. It was a pressure below the eardrum and behind the breastbone, the feeling of a low note you could lean against. I straightened and looked around. The gallery was still fossil bones and a fragment of the drilling rig that had broken on an artifact we did not understand. I took a step toward the sphere. The hum brightened, small as a held breath. They said stasis. They said unknown. I said hello without moving my lips, because speech felt impolite. The hum lengthened. For a moment I thought I'd felt it rise under my palm, the one holding the cloth. I could have told myself it was imagination and saved myself a year of complicated choices. I did not. I began to speak to her the way you speak to any sleeping stranger you don't want to startle. In the mornings, I told her what the sky looked like. I described the slow migration of dust across the ridge, the way the sun shrank and sharpened as it thinned the atmosphere above us. I told her which schoolchildren were scheduled for tours, the kind of questions they asked that made me love my work. Do the old bones remember running? If we breathe the same air, are we a little bit related? Are there museums on other worlds where they keep pieces of us? She did not answer. The hum did. I learned its moods. When I left, the lights dimmed longer than usual. It fell lower. When a storm braided lightning in the dust, It climbed to a tone that made my eyes water. When I set my hand on the glass and simply stood, the hum grew warm around me. It felt like a tide remembering how to return. The docents called it cute, the way I spoke to her. The security guards called it creepy. The director called it not in your job description. The board called it a liability when they thought I couldn't hear. But the schoolchildren, who do not care about boards or job descriptions, pressed their faces to the viewing line and whispered hello, and sometimes one of them would place a hand right over the spot where mine had been, as if a shared touch could travel through. The first time the girl moved, I didn't see it. I felt it in my wrist bones, a tremor as delicate as a heartbeat. I set down the rag and watched. Minutes passed in the old way. Then her hair shifted, a slow underwater drift. It could have been current. It could have been wish. The next morning, a swirl of condensation had appeared on the inside of the glass opposite my usual place. A faint spiral the size of my palm, with 5 smaller swirls nested inside it like fingerprints. The hum found a new note that day. I cleaned very carefully and told no one. Her star marks were not random. I knew this because they began to repeat themselves in the condensation, as if the glass remembered patterns the skin had taught it. I started sketching them in the margins of maintenance logs and on the backs of shipping slips. I traced them in the air with the tip of my rag and felt the hum gather. I mapped a dozen before I recognized any. The 13th was Mars viewed from above the South Pole, the ancient riverbeds threaded like veins across the face. The 14th was a pattern I'd seen only in photographs from Earth, migrating flocks over the North Atlantic, drawn in lines that looked like script. The 15th was nothing I knew. It held my eyes the way a horizon holds water dot at night. After the museum closed, I began bringing my lunch to Gallery 7 and eating it on the floor, back against the plinth of a fossilized tree. It felt like sitting at the edge of a lake. I told her about my mother's first trip down from orbit to visit me, how she'd cried at the sight of a poplar in the hydroponics market because it looked like a thing that belonged somewhere else and had forgiven itself for thriving. I told her about the letter my father had left me when he signed on to the long haul back to Earth to say goodbye to his own mother, and how the pumps failed 2 months in and the crew turned their ship into a raft that made it anyway. I told her things I rarely told the living because her silence felt like a deep lakehood for keeping, not for drowning. If museums are temples, someone eventually tries to buy the god. The board announced an offer in the 6th month of my speaking. A defense consortium with a name that sounded like a door closing wanted to take custody of the sphere. They called it a custody transfer, not a sale. They called their labs research, not a vault. They brought a press release about preserving heritage and unlocking the future. I read the words and felt the hum, slant toward a minor key. The director asked me to sign a statement describing the condition of the glass. He did not ask what I thought. He shook my hand with the soft pressure of someone trying to signal kindness to an employee leaving a party early. That night, I stayed long after the dome switched to stars. The city below our ridge hummed like a sleeping animal. I stood with my palm on the sphere until my hand grew warm and I could feel my own blood in it. I said her name aloud for the first time, though I had not been given one. It arrived like coordinates in a dream. I do not know if I named her or she taught me what to call her. Asterisk Lyra. The hum deepened. Somewhere in the building, a cleaner knocked a bucket into a doorframe and swore, and the sound echoed through the steel like a bell. Lyra's fingers twitched. a movement no one could clock with instruments that preferred zeros, and ones to grief and relief. The next morning I slept through my alarm. When I ran the ridge stairs 2 at a time, I could see the storm rolling in from the west, a red wall teased with lightning. I keyed through the service door and found Gallery 7 already lit and crowded. The director stood with his pinched smile. 2 representatives from the consortium stood with tablets and clean shoes and eyes that avoided the glass. A pair of movers in exosuits idled a grav sled beside the plinth. I do not know what these people would have seen if I had not spoken. They would have seen their morning. I saw the end of something that had practiced breathing for months and was about to be smothered by long words. "Wait," I said. I stepped into the circle of light around the sphere and laid my hand down as I had every day. The hum rose as if climbing a ladder placed on a ship. The storm brushed the dome and made the lights flicker. The exosuits whined softly. A hairline crack of light appeared in the sphere where no crack had ever been. It was not damage. It was the absence of opacity, a seam remembered. The consortium woman took a step forward, tablet raised. The director whispered my name in a tone reserved for misbehaving children. I told Lyra a story with no flourish because only truth had worked so far. I told her about the first time I crawled through an air duct as a child after my father dared me to go find the sound in the wall. I told her about lying halfway in darkness and halfway in the bright kitchen while the fan clicked like a clock and the dust made me sneeze and my father laughed. I told her about learning that machines calm down when you let them be what they are before you ask them to do what you want. The seam widened, very slightly. The hum gathered into a note I could not have sung with my best voice on my best day. One of the movers swore under his breath. The consortium woman lowered her tablet. "If you move her now," I said, not turning, "you will break her." I didn't know if that was true. I knew only that it felt like a fact. The director made a small motion with his hand as if he could rearrange the day without touching it. The storm hit the dome head on. The static found the big girders above us and traced them with white fire. For a moment, the museum was louder than any room I had ever been in. And then the emergency systems took over and the lights cut to half. The grav sleds shut down. The exosuits stuttered. The building took a breath the way a lung does when it remembers before it remembers to do it again. The seam in the sphere became a line of clear light. It widened with the patient certainty of a tide. I did not move my hand. The hum braided with the building's own frequencies and found a place inside them to rest. Lyra opened her eyes. They were the color of distance. They were not human eyes, and I could not have told you how, except that looking into them felt like standing at the edge of a cliff where the air is bigger than the body. She blinked once. Her lips parted as if to ask whether we had been waiting long. The hum became a tone inside my bones. The seam widened until it was the shape of a door. The consortium man took a step forward. "We need to contain." Lyra lifted one hand, palm outward. She did not touch the glass. The tone from the sphere touched the air in the room and found our throats and spines and told them, the oldest thing they know, "Be still." We were. She took a breath. It was not from our air. The sphere gave it to her, and the mist inside brightened, then thinned. She exhaled, and the condensation made a spiral on the glass, like the first one. Like a signature, I put my other hand on the sphere. If you have ever held someone's hand during waking, you know the way the grip changes a little when the mind returns. The hum settled. The door in the glass did not open or close. It did something more honest. It became a place. Lyra looked at me, not around me, not through. At a tear rose and held at the seam of my lower lashes, because my body keeps a good archive. She held her hand near mine on the other side of the glass, and I knew what everyone in the room knew, whether they admitted it or not. This was not our thing to own. I'm sorry, I said into the soft new air. I hadn't planned to say it. It was only the truth that arrived first. We put you in a room and called you ours. Her mouth moved. The tone translated as feeling more than words, and then became words, because our minds are lazy and want sounds they recognize. Not yours, she said. Not mine. Ours, if we learn. The director made a small sound he might later call, or the consortium woman closed her eyes, just for a heartbeat, and when she opened them again, the mean light had gone out of them. The one ambition puts there when it forgets it must serve something larger than itself. Please, I said. The word, a shape in my throat and a request to the room as much as to Lyra. Let us learn. The board postponed the transfer. The storm did us that much kindness. In the days that followed, the museum was not itself. It was what it had always wanted to be. People came and did not ask for selfies. They stood and let silence teach them. Engineers from the university sat on the floor with me and sketched Lyra's spirals and heard the hum as an equation that curved like a hand. Children pressed their palms to the viewing line and told stories about their grandmothers and their first scraped knees and the time the dome lights went out and stars appeared where they should not have, and how that felt like permission. Lyra did not leave the sphere that week. She was not a tourist, and this was not a prison break. We learned to meet at the seam. I learned to listen for seconds before I spoke. She learned that some of our questions were about fear and some were about love, and both are important because they both shape air. On the 8th day, when the storm season eased and the city slept without dreaming of roofs tearing loose, Lyra reached her hand through the seam and touched the outside air. The sphere thinned itself there, the way water does around a finger. The mist trembled and held. She smiled a little, the way you do when rain learns your name. She touched the glass where my palm waited. Warmth traveled. It was not heat. It was the opposite of absence. The hum resolved into a chord I had heard only twice before, once when my father's ship docked 3 months late, and the gangway finally came down and he stepped into gravity and didn't fall. Once when my mother forgave herself for sighing too much and taught me how to make soup properly, no shortcuts. The chord named a fact and did not apologize for it. You are here, it said. I am here. We can begin. The consortium withdrew its offer, not because they could not take what they wanted, but because the room had changed the people who wanted it. That is the only kind of miracle I trust. The board printed a new plaque that did not put a number where a name should go. It read, "The girl in the glass sphere, given name unknown, known to us as Lyra, found beneath basalt at Elysium. Stasis not a machine but a listening. Display is not possession. Approach with a story. We kept the old plaque in storage. Sometimes at night I took it out and read the words and held them beside the hum in the gallery, until the hard places in the text softened. Language learns if you give it time and a tone to tune to." Lyra left the sphere on a winter afternoon, when the sky looked like iron and the dome made it a cathedral. She stepped through the seam the way a child steps through a tide and onto the museum floor that had been polished by 1,000 small acts of reverence. She stood there and breathed her own air and ours and the agreement between them. The room did not explode. The future did not collapse. Nothing terrible happened except that we now had to live up to what we had asked for. She walked to the viewing line where a dozen children waited with their palms out, obedient to a boundary that had taught them not how far to go but how to meet. She lifted her hand without looking away from me and placed it on the line. The children lifted theirs and did the same. An older woman who cleaned the galleries on Tuesdays reached into her pocket, took out a candy, and put it carefully on the rail. Lyra smiled at her, and the older woman smiled back. And I knew in that moment that all the speeches in the world could not have done what that candy had done. After the museum closed that night, we sat on the floor together, backs against opposing plinths. The scene between us, a ripple of clear air. The dome above us held the red sky at bay. The lights hummed steady. I told Lyra about the first time I'd seen Earth. Not with my eyes, but with a feeling in the chest that didn't fit words well. How blue had looked like a kind of forgiveness. She told me about a city that floats on water, that sometimes forgets the moon. How songs there are not sung to be heard but to be held. How language can be something a house wears, not a person. We did not talk about borders or permits or what the board would do next. We talked about tea. We talked about dust and why it clings to the lips of things. We talked about how the hum feels when you are the one making it to be heard. In the weeks that followed, Lyra came and went. The sphere remained not a prison and not an icon, but a room that knew how to host. The museum changed in small, unglamorous ways. We installed a bench that faced the seam, a low shelf of paper and pencils for visitors to draw the constellations they carried inside them, a slot where you could leave a note you didn't know how to say aloud. Engineers drafted plans for houses with membranes that could separate without dividing. The city council approved a pilot program for meeting rooms where everyone could breathe once. Late in the storm season, the power faltered again. The lights dipped, and the backup hesitated, and the building emptied its lungs. I placed my hand on the sphere without thinking. Lyra placed hers. The hum rose and found the frequency of the failing power and guided it into place. Sometimes that's all a miracle is, a tone that reminds a machine of its job. When she finally gave me a word for her true name, it wasn't a sound I could make cleanly. I kept bruising it with my human tongue. She laughed softly and gave me permission to keep trying. I gave her my name as if I were giving her a tool and not a secret. It fit her mouth differently than it had ever fit anyone else's, and I loved that. I do not know if they will write about us the way museums like to write about firsts. First contact, first word, first law. Those are neat lids for leaky jars. I think if anyone remembers, it will be because they stood in a room where a glass sphere taught. Them that display is not possession, and breath is an agreement, and stories are keys that do not break the locks they open on Mars, under a red sky that learns slowly how to be kind. A museum kept a girl in a glass sphere until the day the girl kept the museum. She was never ours. We were hers only if we learned how to be each other's. I have dusted the glass every morning since, even though it does not need it, because my hand remembers what my eyes sometimes forget. This is a place where two worlds learned to begin, one touch at a time.